Welcome back to Just Listed Mastery Part 2. In this, we're going to be talking about how to maximize the strategy so that you can capitalize and get the most amount of listings from this particular source.
Hi everyone, Robert Villanueva here. Over a buyer's home. And of course, as always, I'll see you at the top.
Okay, so let's go ahead and get started. We're going to go ahead and talk about the recap of the previous video. If you didn't get a chance to watch the first video, it's a little bit about mindset, concept, and things of that nature. But I'm going to go through a very brief recaps to make sure that we're all on the same page. Okay, but I would encourage you to go watch part one because I do go into the depthness on some of these particular points. On the very first point, I talked about linking the prospecting we do every single day with the goals that we want to achieve. This is important because, of course, we want to make sure the days that we're discouraged, the days we aren't feeling it, that you're doing everything in your power to stay on track, which is, of course, point number two. Point number two is you have to be consistent. Consistency is absolute vital and it's key. I relate this to kind of like working out. You work out 5, 6 days out of the week, you should get some half decent results. But if you work out ever so often, well, it's not going to work too well. This is the exact same thing. Now, on point number three, we talked about how to say, in some cases, how you say it is more important than what you say. Let me repeat that. So how you say the scripts sometimes is more important than what you say. Okay, so we want to make sure we understand that. Now, the other thing is how we can, of course, improve on that is you have to practice because perfect practice gets you the results. And we always want to practice the examples that we had, from the previous day. And then, of course, continuing to work on that. The next one is number 5, daily mindset. You have to work on this every single day because it's vital. We do find ourselves in a position where we do get discouraged. We do get unmotivated. We find ourselves, why am I doing this? Well, you have to work on your mindset every single day. Sixth one, we talked about avoiding distractions. Those are things that we have to make sure that we are, of course, avoiding because that prolongs everything that we're doing throughout the day. So instead of working on our prospecting for 3 to 4 hours, it ends up taking us 5 to 6 hours. And of course, everything gets further delayed on everything else. Last but not least, the small little points, we did talk about the day to put in the listings into the MLS. And that day that I would always encourage would be either Wednesday or Thursday. So that's a little bit of the recap on part one. Let's jump into what are some of the strategies. Now I'm gonna share with you. This is my personal experience. Okay, this is what I did. This is how I was able to capitalize a little over 700 listings, specifically from Just Listeds, by using some of these strategies. So let's talk about the 5-step Just Listed system. This is one thing that I'm really proud of, and I would make sure that I would do a very good job in terms of being able to maximize every single listing that we would get. Now, in that, the 5 steps that I'm referring to, the first one would be a just listed round of phone calls. Now, depending on the home, we would call 250, 500, and or 1,000 phone numbers of the nearest neighbors. The second step, we would go and knock on the same doors that we would actually telephone prospect, and we would do that very strategically. Now, I'm going to break down all 5 of these steps as we continue, but for right now, this is the one thing that really made me stand out versus my competition. The third one, I would wedge in an open house. Okay, I would do an open house between the just listed and the just solds. The fourth step, what we would do is once the property would go under contract, we'd get an offer accepted, we would then go back to the just sold phone calls. So we would call the exact same neighbors. The fifth step, we would now do a round of just sold door knocks. And that's right, we would knock on the exact same doors. So let me paint a picture for you. I take a listing. I do a round of just listed phone calls. Now, in that, I'm not just doing the just listed phone calls. What I'm also doing is I'm pushing people to my open house. By the way, Mr. and Mrs. Neighbor, we would like to encourage you and come on by to our open house. We're going to be hosting this Saturday or Sunday or whatever the day may be. Now, this is important. Okay, now I'm going to go into the depthness of this in just a little bit, but this is important because it would start to trigger a sense of interest. We would follow that with a just listed door knock. We would push people over to the open house. We would then, of course, call back the exact same people on the just sold phone calls. And then the fifth one is, of course, we would do the just sold door knocks. Now, there would be some bonus things we do. We do, for example, postcards, tagging on social media. We would send it to our personal database, so on and so forth. But those are the 5 steps to the just listed system. Now think about it. Which realtor do you know of is doing this on every single listing? And we would do this, maybe not 100% of the listings, but it was the larger percentage. I would say 70, 80, maybe even as many as 90% of the listings we would take is the approach that we would do. Now let's break it down a little bit. Now, this is important we understand this because in the very first step, we would do that just listed, just sold phone calls. Now, when I would call a client in the area or basically a potential future seller, one of the neighbors, hi, my name is Robert. I'm a local realtor. The reason I'm calling is we just listed your neighbor's property right down the street. It's over on Pepper Avenue. It's a beautiful 4-bedroom, 2-bath home. We just listed at a great price of $500,000. And I was wondering, who do you know that'd like to move into our area? Hey, I appreciate you taking the time to think about that. Tell me, how about yourself? When are you planning on moving? You're not. Great. Well, how long have you lived here? Where'd you move from? How'd you happen to pick this area? If you were to make a move, where would you go to next? You're not thinking about it. Well, hey, we're going to be holding an open house this Saturday. I'd love the opportunity to encourage you to come on by to come check it out. Or for that matter, in case you come across anybody, feel free to send them our way. Now, I would do that very, very strategically because, again, I would push people in the direction of the open house. So instead of having an open house where we would have 1, 2, or 3 people that would show up, you'd sit there, twiddle your thumbs. We would, in most cases, have double-digit people coming by. Now, I talked about the second step. And in that second step, we talked about knocking on the doors. So here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to give you an example. I call the client, go through the script that I just went through. And in most cases, here's the part that we are not privy to. What we're not privy to is the conversation after. What's the conversation after? I go through my script. Person says, no, 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 not interested. They hang up the phone. Well, the spouse goes, hey, honey, who was that? Oh, some realtor. Well, what did he want? Well, he's basically talking about some property that's for sale and they're going to be doing some open house. Oh, how much are they asking? Honey, why are you asking all the questions? Well, I mean, we've always talked about possibly getting something a little bit bigger, something smaller, something newer, something older, something whatever, right? And then there's a little bit of the interest. Nothing really comes of that, but at least there is a initial conversation. It doesn't happen with everybody, but I just want to paint a picture of something we don't pay attention to. Well, now I go back and I always do it strategically. And what I mean by that is that I would go through and call first, second, third, fourth, fifth, sixth, seventh, eighth, ninth, and 10th Avenue as an example. I would follow it also. So on Monday, I'd call First, Second, and Third Street, or Avenue, whatever you want to call it. And then on Tuesday, I would go and knock on First, Second, and Third Avenue. Now I would do this. Why would I do it like this? Here's the reason. Because when I'd go and knock on the door, I'd go through and use the exact same script. Hi, my name is Robert. I'm a local realtor. And the reason I'm stopping by is we just listed your neighbor's property just right down the street. It's over that way, over on Pepper Avenue. It's a beautiful 4-bedroom, 2-bath home. And we just listed at a great price of $500,000. And I was wondering, who do you know that'd like to move into our area? Well, now the person says, hey, did you call yesterday? Did you call earlier in the week? I probably did. Yeah. Who do you know that wants to move into our area? Well, how much are you asking for that house again? 500,000. Wow. Do you think you can get that price for that house? I don't know. We're hoping to. We're going to be holding that house open on Saturday. We'd love the opportunity to invite you to come on by. Well, with that being said, how about yourself? When are you thinking about making a move? You're toying with the idea. Oh, interesting. Well, how long have you lived here? Where'd you move from? How'd you happen to pick this area? If you were to make a move, where would you go to next? Oh, you're thinking about getting something a little bit bigger. What would be the benefit of that? How soon are you wanting to do that? Not right now. I get it. Hey, don't worry about it. Come on by over to Open House, and we'd love the opportunity to come and show you around. Now, I would do that strategically. And why would I do that strategically? Because I'd start with a phone call, like I mentioned. I'd go to the doors, and then guess what would end up happening on that open house? Now, a good percentage of the time, I wasn't the one that would hold the house open. I would, in most cases, have either one of my team members or another agent hold it open. I do the open house every once in a while. I'm not too big for that, but I would almost always have another agent. Why? It would give me the opportunity to be a little more flexible because in the open house, I'm there doing the cameos, kissing the babies, shaking hands, doing the hellos, bringing the Starbucks, doing all that other stuff, right? Well, while I'm there at the open house that Saturday, as an example, well, guess who strolls on in? Mr. and Mrs. next door neighbor. Well, what are they doing there? They're not looking at buying the house. My mind, that's my next seller. That's what I'm doing. I'm actually going through scoping out all of my potential and future sellers. That's what I'm looking for. Now, of course, there are going to be buyers, there are going to be people that are going to be interested, and we would double land a little over 50% of our listings based on what I'm talking about. Well, let's say that at the open house, that particular neighbor comes in, takes a look, just kind of scopes it out and says, wow, 500,000 for this house, but they don't even have a pool. We have a pool, honey. What do you think we should be able to ask for our house? Now the interest is, of course, increasing. Well, nothing comes of it other than just the cordials, the hellos, how are you doing? Come on in. So let's stay in touch, so on and so forth. What I would then do is we would, of course, in most cases, sell the property fairly quickly within a week, two or three. And guess who would be the very first phone call I would make? The very first phone call I would make would be to that particular future client. That would go, Mr. and Mrs. Neighbor, hi, my name is Robert. This is the local realtor. Remember you and I spoke at the open house? Oh, yeah, that's right. Well, believe it or not, we actually ended up selling that house. And we did end up getting a little bit over asking price. And we know when one sells, usually a few more sell right away. And I was curious, how about yourself? I know you were toying with the idea. When are you thinking about making that move? You really got 500,000 for the house? Well, no, not really. We actually got a little bit more. There we go. Okay. So I would do the just sold phone campaign. And of course, I'd wrap that up with the fifth one being the just sold door knock. Now, the reason I would, of course, do the door knock is because not everybody picks up the phone. So as you can see, it would be, quite a bit of exposure. Now, here's the thing, is that these people would sit there and it's one listing. That one listing, we would get a lot of buzz in the neighborhood. Now, it doesn't necessarily mean that we would take a listing and next week we have another listing, but I would tell you this, a good percentage, I would probably say about 30% of the time, we would get another listing in the neighborhood. And here's the best part about it. We get another listing in the neighborhood, and let's say it's 3 months later. Well, guess what? We're doing the exact same thing over and over and over and over again. Sometimes we would only have two or three listings in that particular community, but just in that 1 year, those clients would be touched 15, 20 times from all of the different things that we would do. So it would generate a lot of potentials. Now, of that, sometimes it would move us over to another part of town. Why? Because we would actually talk to somebody, and then the moment that we speak to them, they would say, well, we're not thinking about selling this house, but we have a rental over in this part of town. Could you take care of that? Absolutely. So I wanted to paint that picture for you as detailed as I possibly could. I'm going to break down the other points in a little bit more specific. As you can see, this is the reason why I wanted to do a two-part series because it's a lot of information. Now let's break down the just listed and just sold phone calls. You want to be specific on the number of calls you're going to make. What do I mean by that? If it's going to be 250, you're going to do a just listed and a just sold on the exact same 250. What you're also going to want to do is you're going to want to try that entire list the minimum of 3 times. What do I mean by that? You're going to call through every single last 100 or every single one of those 250 people. The next day, you'll try it again. The next day, you'll try it again. You keep trying it because not everybody is always going to, in a sense, be home on that Monday or Tuesday or Wednesday or whatever it is. You're going to continue to try that. The third thing is you're going to push everybody to the open house is what you're wanting to do. Okay. Now, let's talk about the door knocking. The door knocking is something that you're going to want to do, of course, almost immediately. But again, I talked about a little bit of a strategy. And the reason why I mentioned to you first in regards to the strategy is because I would call First Avenue, Second Avenue, Third Avenue. That would be on Monday. On Tuesday, I would knock First, Second, and Third Avenue. And then on Tuesday, I would call Fourth, Fifth, and Sixth Avenue as an example. And then on Wednesday, the next day, I would knock on Fourth, Fifth, and Sixth Avenue. I would do that strategically because, again, I would get the, hey, did you call? Remember that? So that's the reason why I would do that. And again, you want to use this for the sake of pushing people to the open house. By the way, we're holding that house open this Saturday. We'd love the opportunity to have you come on by. Let's talk a little bit about the open house. This isn't the open house mastery. We'll talk about that in another video, but I do want to make sure that I bring a couple of quick points. When you do an open house, in this particular case, you want to do post an open house sign in advance. What do I mean by that? Well, today's Monday. We're holding that house open on Saturday. I'm going to put an open house sign in the front of the house. We're going to be holding this house open this Saturday. So all the neighbors get the opportunity to see that that property is going to be held open that Saturday. Instead of some of you will end up putting up 2, 3, or 4 signs at 11:45 for an open house between 12 and 3. With that being said, I want you to post as many as 50 signs. I get it. I understand. I did say 50. Some areas won't allow you to do this, but whenever you possibly can, put them up. Another quick little trick that I'm going to give you, I get it. Every city has certain ordinances. You can only have signs up at a certain amount of time, whatever that may be. But in that, whenever possible, as an example, okay, don't throw me under the bus, please. We'd have an open house on Saturday. What we would do is we would put the open house signs Friday night, a little bit of a cheat code. Now, why would we put them up Friday night? Because I didn't want to be that realtor that would be putting up 50 for sale signs or open house signs, open house signs Saturday morning, rush home, being all sweaty, rush back to the open house. That way on Friday, I would be very specific in regards to where I wanted to place them. I'd put them at my pace, my leisure, and then Saturday morning, they would all be out. And why would I do it this early? The reason I would do it this early is because a lot of times you get some of the parents that would go drop their kids off at soccer practice, baseball practice, basketball practice, whatever it may be, and they'll go, oh yeah, that's right. There's going to be that open house. So you want to get the exposure out there as much as you possibly can. Now, let's talk about a couple of more points. I don't want to turn this into this big, gigantic 45-minute video. I got 2 more specific points that I want to cover. Let's talk about lead follow-up, because this is another thing that is really, really important. And what I mean by that, in the lead follow-up, there should be about 70 to 80% of your business is going to come from this area. And in this, you want to make sure that you identify what are those leads. Now, there's another video that I have out there in regards to, of course, mastering that of lead follow-up. So go watch that video so that you can pay closer attention to the points that I'm referring to. But in this, for the sake of what we're talking about here, is you want to make sure that you're identifying what are those leads. Now, for me, a lead was always somebody that was looking to buy or sell in the next 30 days. Yeah, I said in the next 30 days. Well, what about the people that were on the other side of 30 days? Well, they would fall under one of 2 categories. And the one of 2 categories, number 1, would basically be with what would be called a condition. Number 2 would be an objection. Now, how do we identify this? The way we identify this, the most important question in lead follow-up is, we've talked about this, think about it. The question is, what is stopping you from making the move right now? Because on the other side of that question, I get, again, those 2 responses. Number 1 is going to be an objection. The objection is going to look along the line of, we're not ready. We're waiting for the market to come down. We're waiting for interest rates. We're, all of, in a sense, these different excuses, if you want to call it that. But then there's the second one, and the second one is more of a condition. Remember, a condition is something that we can't overcome. What would be a condition? Well, I'm moving over to Florida, but I got to wait for my job transfer. And until I got my job transfer, there's nothing we're going to do. We're waiting for a settlement. And until we get that settlement, we're not really going to make that move. We just found out that my spouse is going to be taken off of maternity leave because she's on a high risk pregnancy. So the lender told us that we can't do anything until she returns back to work, and that's another 6 months. My son or daughter is going to be graduating high school, and we're not going to take them out of high school until they graduate next year. So with those people, you're going to identify which ones are leads with a condition and which ones are basically just what I call our suspects. I'm not going to go into the depthness of that because we have an entire video about that, but I want to make sure that I do cover that because this is an important part to the just listed setup and system. You have to get their motivation as quickly as possible. Every time I'm working with a coaching client, I ask them as my coaching client tells me, hey, coach, I got a new lead. I got a buyer, I got a seller, I got a this. Great. What's their motivation? Um, well, I think they want to do this. I think they no, that's not it. You have to know clearly what their motivation is. Because when their motivation is high, you're going to have a little bit more forgiveness on holding on to those people. When their motivation is low, you got to get rid of them. Okay. Now, why am I going to do this? Because I want to get rid of people as quickly as I possibly can, and I don't want to inundate my system. And I'm going to talk about the system here in specific about that. Last thing is, whenever they give us a time frame, if it's more than 3 months, let's say, for example, right now, as I'm recording this, we are in March, and the person says, well, Robert, why don't you call me towards the end of the year? Okay, great. Should I call you like in October or November? Yeah, that sounds about right. Whatever they tell me after 3 months, I'm going to cut it in half. So if it's in September, I'll probably call them in June or July. Why do I do that? I just want to make sure that we're still on track. And I'll even tell them, Mr. and Mrs. Seller, hey, it's Robert. I know you mentioned to me that you're going to be looking at, or you wanted me to call you in September. Well, I just want to make sure we're still on track for that. The reason I would do that is because every once in a while, I'm sure this has happened to you before, where that particular client, or you, as you're going through your lead follow-up, as you're going through your lead follow-up, all of a sudden the client says, you know what, Robert, we already listed. We're already moved into our new home. All of these things. So I would always cut the time in half to avoid as many of those type of situations. It wasn't foolproof, but it at least gave me the opportunity. Okay, so we want to make sure that we're in a position where we do the proper lead follow-up. Now, let's talk about the biggest point. Now, in this, the biggest point for me is with what I call is the filtration system. Now, in the filtration system, I know it's kind of a silly little word, but this is the way that I would kind of process it in my mind. Every day, going through, making 10, 15, 20, 25 just listed or sold contacts. Every single day, I would get 1 to 2 names and numbers, not leads, just names and numbers, potentials, maybes, hopefuls. At one point in time, I'm thinking about it, all of those people. You do this 5 days a week, you're talking about 5 to 10 potential names and numbers. Over the course of an entire month, you're talking about 20 to 40 names and numbers. Again, they're not leads. They're just names and numbers of potentials, maybes, hopefullys at one point in time. I'm thinking about it eventually. If the right opportunity shows up, then maybe I'll do this. That's what I'm referring to. But you build that momentum. And when you build that momentum in about 3 to about 6 months, it's going to start to turn into appointments. Ideally, based on what I'm talking about, this was kind of common for me that in everything I'm talking about, I would get anywhere from 2 to 4 appointments. Those 2 to 4 appointments a month is what I'm saying. After 3 to 6 months would turn into 1 to 2 listings taken. And of course, those numbers got even better. I would get as many as 6 and even as many as 7, 8 listings taken specifically from the source based on what I'm talking about. But I want to keep it simple for you, okay? Because I don't want to sit here and try to pretend like as if all of a sudden this source is going to make you 100 deals. It doesn't work that way. It takes time. You have to work on this stuff, okay? No, this is important in regards to the filtration system because as much as you are inputting people into the system, you got to get rid of them. You have to get rid of them as quickly as you possibly can because if not, it inundates your system. You got to watch the lead follow-up video specifically for everything that I just mentioned in the last 2 points, but this is what I would call the filtration system. Now, this point here, the reason why it's so important in the entire process of the just listed, just solds is because one of two main things is what ends up happening to most realtors. They go through, they call, they do everything that they're supposed to, they get a maybe, possibly, hopefully, and then they don't follow up, right? Or your follow-up is so weak that when you do follow up because it's inconsistent, you get the we've already sold, we're under contract, we're already on the MLS, all of these things. You got to stay ahead of it, which is really, really important throughout this entire process. And of course, the second thing is that you have to be able to build that consistency, because the more often you do this, the better the opportunities are going to come out of it. And you have to be able to do this if you want to maximize this source. Everything I just shared with you, at one point in time in my career, I was actually taking between 6 to 8 of these in a month. So just imagine 6 to 8 from door knocking, from telephone prospecting, specifically just listeds. So hopefully all of this information was helpful. Hopefully you watched part one of this so that it can make a little bit more sense. And of course, I would really appreciate if you commented, subscribed, but most importantly, of course, shared. The other thing is you see the QR code here. You're welcome to scan that. You can see my other platforms. I'm also on Instagram, TikTok. I'm also on Facebook. And in Facebook, we actually have a private group. A private group is called Top Realtor Training. We get together on Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday, 7:30 a.m. Pacific Standard. We'll do about 30 minutes and we work on our skills and on the scripts as well. So hopefully all this information was helpful for you. Again, as always, Robert Villanueva, your favorite coach here. I'll see you at the top.
Hi, everyone. Robert Villanueva here.